Hello, my name's Harlan, 70 years old, and I thought I'd earned a little peace in my own home. But at Thanksgiving, my son handed his father-in-law the keys to a $500,000 villa, and handed me nothing but an oven mitt. I sat there smiling, pretending it didn't cut me in half. They thought the old man wouldn't notice, that I'd just fade into the background. But they don't know what I found buried in my late wife's garden, or the secrets she left only for me. Why would my own blood treat me like a burden? And what truth was my wife hiding all along? I pulled up in front of Cormac's house, killing the engine and sitting still for a second. The driveway was lined with luxury SUVs, and the freshly manicured lawn looked like it had come straight out of a magazine. It wasn't the house I remembered, not the one Ruth and I used to visit, back when laughter spilled out the front door before we even rang the bell. Today, the laughter felt more like a show. The crisp Indiana air bit at my cheeks as I stepped out. Pumpkin pie balanced in my hands. Ruth's old recipe. I baked it this morning, just like she used to. The smell of roasted turkey drifted from the kitchen windows, and somewhere out back, kids were screaming over a football game. Norman Rockwell would have loved the scene, but I wasn't feeling very painted in. As I walked up the stone path, the door opened. Celine stood there in a cranberry-colored dress that probably cost more than my month's pension. "Harlan," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You made it." I nodded. "Of course. Wouldn't miss Thanksgiving." She took the pie, glanced at it. "Oh, how sweet. You didn't have to bake." Then she turned on her heels and disappeared into the kitchen before I could even take my coat off. Inside, the place had changed. Open floor plan, white marble everywhere, and soft jazz playing over hidden speakers. People were milling about, wine glasses in hand, chatting about stocks and schools I'd never heard of. Cormac emerged from the den with a boyish grin, hugged me with one arm, then looked over his shoulder mid-embrace. "Hey, Dad, glad you're here." That was it. I hung my coat by the door and scanned the room. No one looked my way, not even little Boaz, who used to crawl into my lap every Thanksgiving. I saw him now, sitting beside Celine's father, Fayard, silver-haired, slick-talking, the life of the party. He had Boaz laughing with some magic trick involving coins. Ruth would have loved that. A couple of guests passed me without a glance. I stood there, pieless and coatless, holding on to a presence no one had really invited. "All right, everyone." I followed the herd toward the dining room, expecting to sit at the main table like always. It had my name on it for decades, but then she said it. "Cormac, your dad can sit with the kids in the den, yeah?" I stopped. "Sorry, what?" She laughed. "Oh, it's just a little tight this year. We set up an overflow table. It's cute, actually beanbag chairs and everything." I looked at Cormac. He avoided my eyes, scratched his neck. "Yeah, it's just this one time. Dad, hope that's okay." I stood there, stunned. Fayard raised his wine glass toward me, grinning. "Den's got the best view of the game, Harlan. Perks of being cool grandpa." "Huh?" A teenager nearby snorted. "That's Grandpa's spot," then ducked his head when his mom shot him a look. I walked to the den without a word. The table was a fold-up card table with paper plates and plastic forks. A toddler was already smearing mashed potatoes into the carpet. I sat down, knees creaking louder than the chair. Across from me, a 7-year-old picked his nose and flicked it under the table. This wasn't an accident. This was orchestration. From the other room, I heard Celine praising her father again. "Fayard brought this amazing Bordeaux from Napa. You just have to try it." He chuckled like a politician kissing babies. Meanwhile, no one had touched the pie. Cormac drifted past me once. I reached out. "Hey, son, how's work going? Still heading up that expansion project?" He nodded, distracted. Yeah, it's good. Real busy." His eyes never fully landed on mine. "Be right back, Dad." But he didn't come back. An hour passed like that. Small hands throwing peas, high-pitched screams, cartoons on mute in the background. I tried to engage, but I was invisible. A woman leaned in from the hall and asked a guest nearby, "Oh, who's that man again?" And before anyone answered, Celine's voice cut through again, sweet as poison. "Harlan just likes to watch from the background anyway." That one stung, because it wasn't always true, but it had become true, hadn't it? Later, I caught Cormac near the hallway, held out a small photo album I'd brought from home. Thought we could look at these later. Ruth always loved this one of you holding Boaz as a baby. Before he could answer, Celine snatched the album. This isn't the time for ancient history, Dad. People are here to enjoy themselves. I tried again, softer this time. Your mom would have loved today. She always said Thanksgiving. She's gone. Harlan, Celine said coldly. You're here because we had to invite you. That's it. There it was. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just turned around, walked out onto the porch. The air had gone colder. I pulled a cigar from my coat pocket, hands trembling as I tried to light it. It slipped through my fingers and rolled off the step. Inside, laughter rolled like thunder. I looked through the window. Fayard was sitting in my seat, the one Ruth used to save for me, carving the turkey, smiling wide. Boaz was on his lap. I looked down at the gift they'd given me when I arrived. A single oven mitt in a paper bag. My voice cracked as I whispered. They gave me an oven mitt and gave him a villa. I stayed on the porch longer than I should have, letting the cold bite through my sweater just so I wouldn't have to fake another smile. But eventually, the sound of clinking glasses and Celine's bright voice calling everyone to the living room pulled me back in. Everyone, we've got a surprise, she chirped, her hand lifted with a wine glass, like some MC at a charity auction. Inside, the furniture had been rearranged, the coffee table pushed back, the kids' toys cleared away. Center stage by the fireplace sat two objects, a gift-wrapped box with a satin bow, and a photo frame I didn't recognize. People gathered close, whispering, some pulling out phones. I stood near the edge of the circle, watching over shoulders. Celine launched into a speech about gratitude, hard work, and those who've guided us. Her words floated in the air like potpourri, sweet, but shallow. Cormac stood beside her, nodding like a backup singer, holding a small velvet box. Then came the reveal. With a flourish, she pulled the cloth off the gift. A glossy real estate photo of a desert villa, arched windows, infinity pool, palms waving in Arizona sun. We're giving this to Dad, she beamed, nodding to Fayard. For everything he's done for our family. Applause. Whoops. Even a couple of teary gasps. Fayard looked stunned, or maybe just smug, as he stepped forward, took the key fob, and gave Celine a hug that went on a few beats too long. I clapped. 2, 3 slow, quiet taps before my hands dropped back to my sides. My jaw tightened. My own son had just gifted a man a $1,000 vacation home, and I was standing there like a potted plant. After the cheers died down, Celine turned my way like she'd forgotten I was still here. Oh, and for Harlan? She said, grabbing something from behind a chair. It was a paper gift bag, wrinkled, with a bent ribbon. She handed it to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Inside was a single oven mitt, red and green, with a cartoon turkey on it, probably from a dollar store. A tiny tag was stapled to the thumb, to Grandpa, for the memories. No signature, no card, just that. I turned it over in my hand, trying not to let my face show anything, but it must have been obvious. A cousin, maybe Carson, I can't keep track anymore, leaned over and whispered, Guess they don't want you burning your hands in the past, huh? I forced a laugh. A dry, hollow thing. Good one, I muttered, folding the mitt back into the bag. I could feel my throat tighten, but I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me tear up. Instead, I stepped away, past the fireplace, down the hall where the lighting was dimmer. There was a mirror, antique, probably Ruth's pick, hanging near the front door. I looked at myself, old, gray, a man on the margins of his own family. Behind me, in the reflection, I saw them gathering around Fayard again, slapping his back, refilling his wine glass. I remembered the day Cormac and I built his treehouse. The hammer was too heavy for his little hands, so I let him hold the nails while I swung. We didn't have much money back then, but we made things work, fixed our own plumbing, patched our own roof, taught our own lessons. And now, this. I leaned forward, speaking to no one. I taught that boy how to say thank you, or so I thought. I stood there for a while, just breathing, remembering, trying not to let it get to me, but then I heard them. Behind the kitchen door, Celine's voice. Good thing we titled it under Dad's name. Taxes will be cleaner this way. Then Fayard, chuckling. Harlan thinks legacy means photo albums. We played it well. My ears rang. The kind of silence that screams. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd maneuvered me out. Back in the living room, the fireplace still crackled. I pulled the oven mitt from my pocket, held it for a beat, then tossed it in, watched the fabric curl, the turkey's cartoon face twist into flame. They made one mistake tonight, I said, low. They thought I wouldn't see. I woke up still dressed in yesterday's clothes, the waistband of my khakis digging into my gut, my shirt half untucked. The room was dim, but daylight leaked through the blinds, gray and cold. My back ached from sleeping sideways on the couch. The whole house smelled like burnt wood and coffee grounds, and for a moment, I forgot why my chest felt so heavy. Then I remembered. The fireplace. The Mitt. I sat up slowly, feet flat on the wood floor, and rubbed my eyes with the heels of my hands. On the coffee table, the mug from last night still had half an inch of cold coffee in it. I took it to the sink, poured the rest out, and started a fresh pot. No cream, just black and bitter. The fern by the kitchen window was browning at the tips, hanging limp like it had given up sometime last week. I watched it while the coffee maker hissed behind me. The silence in that house was the kind that hums. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't play the radio, just stood there, letting the memories creep in with the steam. I'd walked home from Cormac's place last night, refused the ride he offered like a reflex. I couldn't stomach sitting next to him. It was a long walk, and my knees hated every step, but it was better than pretending. The voicemail came just before sunrise. Celine. Her voice was light and clipped. Hope you're feeling okay, Harlan. Thanks for coming, really. I didn't listen to the rest, just hit delete. There was a thin layer of dust on the cabinet by the hall mirror. I grabbed an old rag from the drawer and started wiping it down, more to move than clean. When I opened the bottom drawer, something caught my eye. A leather-bound book, edges frayed, cover cracked. I picked it up and wiped the dust off the front. It was the journal, the one Cormac gave me for Father's Day, back when he was still in college. Write everything you know, he'd said, so one day I'll remember you. I opened it. The first pages were filled with my handwriting. Tips on changing spark plugs, notes about marriage, patience, forgiveness, advice on how to apologize, even when you're right. And then deeper stuff, pages on what it meant to be a father. I wrote like I believed he'd care. One entry stopped me cold. Your wife may break your heart, but your kid can rip it from your chest. That was the last entry. I flipped ahead. Nothing. The date? 2 days after he moved out. After the shouting match about grad school. About money. About Celine. I hadn't touched it since. And he'd never asked why. Tucked into the back cover was something I'd forgotten even existed. A yellowed newspaper clipping. I pulled it out carefully. Local coach resigns after controversial family conflict. It was about me. About when I stepped down from coaching the high school team. 22 years of Friday Night Lights. Gone in one meeting. I read the first lines. Due to undisclosed domestic concerns, Coach Dorn has chosen to resign. Undisclosed concerns. I'd thought that phrasing was mine. But now, seeing it again, the language rang different, political. The article quoted a family source saying I'd become rigid at home, too intense with my expectations. The tone was careful, calculated. I remembered Celine's father used to golf with the superintendent. The thought made my stomach knot. Had he... I stepped out onto the porch. Journal still in my hand. The wind had a bite to it, and the sky was the color of wet cement. Across the street, a boy threw a football in lazy arcs, his little sister chasing after it. The ball wobbled in the air. No spiral. I remembered teaching Cormac that spiral right on this lawn, God, he was small then, all elbows and missing teeth. He used to beg me to throw it just one more time, until our arms were sore. Now, he didn't even want Boaz playing. Too violent, he'd said last year, like football was the enemy. It wasn't the oven mitt that had done me in. It was knowing I'd been pushed out of the family circle so gently, so completely. I hadn't even noticed until it was too late. I opened the journal again and flipped to the last blank page. "I'm not invisible," I wrote. "I'm not done yet." Just as I closed it, the landline rang. I almost didn't answer, but something made me lift it. "Harlan," a woman's voice said. I froze. It was Maggie, my wife's sister. We hadn't spoken since the funeral. "You should come by," she said, not missing a beat. "There's something you ought to see. It's about the will." I blinked. "What will?" And then she said a name I hadn't heard in years, and it wasn't mine. Driving into Zionsville felt like pulling into a movie set. Every lawn edge just so, every porch light warm and falsely inviting. The kind of neighborhood where nothing bad ever happened, at least not in public view. I slowed in front of Maggie's two-story house. Its shutters painted a fresh shade of colonial blue. I'd been here before, years ago, back when Celine's mother passed. But today, everything felt different, too quiet, too choreographed. Maggie opened the door before I knocked. "You made good time," she said, trying for a smile, but her eyes darted past me like she wasn't sure if someone had followed me. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. Her hair had gone almost fully gray since then, pulled back tight like she was keeping her thoughts from spilling out. "Coffee?" she asked, stepping aside. Her kitchen hadn't changed, still cluttered with angel figurines lined across the cabinets, each with glittered wings and porcelain stairs. I'd always hated them, felt like they were watching every word. We sat across from each other at her little round table, sipping dark coffee from mugs that said "Blessed" and "Faith." I waited, stirring mine slowly. "I wasn't supposed to tell you this," Maggie said finally, setting her cup down with a faint clink. "But I think you deserve to know." I stopped stirring. "My husband, James, you remember he used to notarize things?" she continued, voice low. 6 months before Celine passed, he was asked to witness a modification to the family trust. My stomach tightened. I didn't say a word, just nodded. It stated that, in the event of her death, the entire estate would transfer to Cormac, and your dear friend Fayard, she added bitterly, and that you'd already received your settlement, in kind. I blinked. "I never signed anything, never agreed to a damn thing." Maggie shook her head. "That's what I figured, but your signature's on it. James told me something felt off, but he didn't push it. They forged my name, or they pretended I'd walked away on my own." Maggie looked pained. I held on to this, trying to convince myself it wasn't my place, but it's been gnawing at me. I stared at the table. The reflection of her angel figurines twisted in the polished surface. Betrayal didn't always come with screaming. Sometimes it arrived in silence, tucked in clauses and cowardice. She stood and returned with a small envelope. "I found this after Celine passed. It was never mailed." She placed it in my hand. It was addressed to me, in her handwriting, postmarked 4 weeks before her death. I opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter, shaky, uneven, like she'd wrestled with every word. "Harlan, I made mistakes. I let Dad push me into things I didn't fully understand, or maybe I just didn't want to face. I'm sorry I shut you out. I thought I was protecting myself, but now I'm not so sure. If you're reading this, I guess I never got the courage to send it. I hope, somehow, you know I didn't hate you." I stared at the ink, her guilt bleeding through every line, the kind of letter you write when your heart's heavy but your spine still can't stand up to the truth. "It's always the words left unsaid that cause the most damage," I murmured, mostly to myself. "I made copies," Maggie said, "of the trust and the envelope." I nodded slowly. "Thank you." The drive back home felt like I was dragging something behind me, heavy, invisible, but getting louder with every mile. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, This wasn't a family rift. This was a setup. Back at my desk, I pulled out a pad of paper and began drafting a letter to Cormac. 2 paragraphs in, I crumpled it and threw it in the bin. Too easy, too civilized. I wasn't going to handle this in private anymore. They wanted quiet closure. I'd give them public reckoning. I looked out the window at the neighborhood boy tossing a football alone in his yard and felt something sharp twist in my chest. It's one thing to be left behind, I muttered. It's another to be erased. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. From Fayard's law office. Inside, a typed reminder that estate matters were already amicably resolved. And there it was, my signature on a document I'd never seen. Stamped and sealed. I flipped to the notary mark. My eyes narrowed. The notary commission had expired 3 years before the date on that form. And just like that, a quiet smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. The afternoon sun slanted across my cluttered desk, hitting the stacks of old law books like they were relics of a former life, which, in a way, they were. Dust rose as I flipped open the folder Maggie had handed me, the one with the scanned trust clause and Celine's unsent letter. Her handwriting danced in my peripheral vision while I laid out the forged documents beside a fresh notepad. I adjusted my reading glasses and began circling dates in red ink. The notary stamp on the settlement form expired 3 years before the document was supposedly signed. The reference to a settlement in kind offered to me never happened, never even brought up. It wasn't just sloppy, it was calculated sloppiness. And Cormac, I couldn't shake the memory of him at 12, sitting at my dinner table while I lectured him about ethics, waving a spoon like a gavel. Integrity, I'd said, means doing the right thing when no one's looking. He nodded along, eyes wide. I'd thought he listened. Turns out, he studied me, then twisted everything I taught. I used to teach kids how to spot moral loopholes, I muttered, jotting down more notes. Now I see my own son exploits them. A knock at my thoughts came in the form of a name, Judge Eleanor Vexler. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but she'd been one of my sharpest students. Now she sat on the probate bench. I picked up the phone and left her a message, brief and coded. She'd understand. We met an hour later in a nearly empty diner on the edge of town. She walked in, silver hair pulled back, trench coat still damp from the mist. "You look exactly the same," she said, sliding into the booth. "You look better," I replied, forcing a smile. She didn't waste time. "If what you say is true, that the notary was expired, and you never signed, the document's legally dead." "But?" I asked. "There's always a but." "But," she sighed. "Poking this bear could set off legal fireworks. Fayard's firm has friends in low places and high offices." I leaned back. "Is it winnable?" She paused, eyes narrowing. "If you document everything and stay 2 moves ahead." We sipped weak coffee in silence. Before she left, she promised to check if the estate had officially entered probate. "I'll keep it quiet," she said, "but you'll need to act fast." Back at home that evening, I barely had time to remove my coat before headlights swept across my living room wall. A black SUV idled outside. I opened the door to a man in a dark suit, tie perfectly straight, smile just a shade too wide. "Mr. Dorn?" he said smoothly. "I'm Huxley, paralegal with Fayard, Gray Wilkes. Just dropping off an updated version of your settlement documentation for your records." He handed me a crisp folder, its weight heavier than paper alone. "We're just hoping to avoid a prolonged public ordeal. These things can get messy." I flipped the first page without reading. "Why now?" "Just a courtesy," he said. "Sometimes it's better to take the oven mitt and walk away, sir." I chuckled dryly. "Yeah, sometimes it is." He smiled like he'd won something, then vanished into the night. I closed the door and locked it. Then I sat down, folder unopened, and called Eleanor. She picked up on the second ring. "They're trying to push you out, aren't they?" "They sent a man," I replied. "Nice suit, polished pitch, and all. But he handed me leverage." I told her about the notary stamp and asked her to double-check the official filings. She called back an hour later. They used a scanned copy in the estate submission, not a physical original. If you can prove that's all they have, it's a crack in the dam. I got to work. My fingers ached. My eyes burned. But I moved through old records like a bloodhound. At the local library, I found it. A property deed never transferred out of Celine's name. Fayard hadn't tied off the loose ends. You tried to cut me out, I whispered to myself, but you left a trail wide enough for an old man with reading glasses. I printed the deed and slid it into a manila folder. In thick black marker, I wrote one word across the front: Endgame. That night, I sat by the fireplace. The flames hissed gently while I reviewed everything. Then came the ding of an email. It was from Eleanor. They just filed the estate, it read. Initial probate hearing set for next Thursday. I looked at the fire, then down at Celine's letter. I didn't burn it. I placed it carefully next to my file. You couldn't speak then, I said aloud. But you'll be heard now. I hadn't worn that gray suit since Celine's funeral. It still smelled faintly of cedar from the closet, but the shoulders sat heavier now. I stood in front of the mirror, straightening the tie she once gifted me for a Christmas long gone. My hands didn't tremble, but they were deliberate. The file marked, "For Celine," sat zipped tight in my leather briefcase. Everything was sorted, color-coded, dated. I'd read every line until I could recite it in my sleep. By the time I reached the Allen County Courthouse, the morning bustle had already taken hold. The marble floors echoed with footsteps, voices, and the rustle of legal briefs. Some families whispered, others argued outright over inheritance and property. The smell of old coffee and polished wood filled the halls. I walked into courtroom 2B alone, but not unarmed. Fayard was already seated at the defense table, surrounded by his legal team like a man holding court in a lion's den. His suit was tailored, his hair slicked back. He didn't glance at me. Cormac was 2 rows behind him, eyes down, pretending not to notice me. Judge Eleanor Wexler entered with the calm detachment only decades on the bench could offer. She gave no sign of recognition. I respected that. She called the docket, and when my name came up, I stood tall. For the petitioner, I said, voice clear. Harlan Dorn. Fayard's attorney began first, methodical, confident. He introduced a packet of documents, the supposed final will, the trust modifications, and of course, the deed to the villa. It was all lined up like dominoes, waiting to fall. I let him speak uninterrupted. When it was my turn, I stood. Your Honor, I request permission to enter supplementary material. Judge Wexler nodded. Proceed. I handed her the original letter, Celine's handwriting, authenticated, dated well after the notary's expiration. The courtroom hushed as she began to read it aloud. My dearest Harlan. Her words trembled through the room like a ghost had entered. In the letter, she confessed regret. Regret for letting Fayard pressure her. Regret for not listening when I warned her. She wrote of feeling isolated, manipulated. She had wanted to revise the trust, but didn't know how to undo what had already begun. The paper bore her signature, her pain, her truth. Gasps echoed. Even Cormac's brow twitched. Fayard leaned forward as if trying to will the words to stop. This is emotional blackmail, his attorney snapped. Judge Wexler didn't blink. It's evidence. The court will review it in full. I stepped forward once more. I'm not here to punish anyone, I began. I'm here to honor my wife's intent, something that got buried beneath strategy and manipulation. I held up the mismatched handwriting samples, the notarization record, the copy-pasted signatures. I recited the timeline I'd pieced together, showing how each step drifted further from Celine's voice. She didn't get to speak up while she was alive, I said. Steady now. But she left us this, and I won't let it be ignored. I looked toward Cormac. He didn't look back. Maybe he couldn't. I paused. This isn't about square footage or market value. It's about who she was, and who some people became when they thought no one would question them. My voice cracked. Once. I lost my wife twice. First to time, then to silence. Judge Wexler called a recess. I stepped into the hallway, the cold granite wall behind me grounding me more than the bench I sat on. 10 minutes later, Fayard strode by, hands in his pockets. You really think words from a dead woman will change the law? I didn't even turn my head. They already changed me. An hour passed. The bailiff called us back in. Judge Vexler addressed the room. This court finds credible cause to question the legitimacy of the estate's current filing, she announced. An evidentiary hearing will be scheduled. All prior transfers will be frozen until then. The defense flinched. Cormac looked pale. As people gathered their things, a young woman in a clerk's badge approached me. "Mr. Dorn?" she asked gently. "This came to the clerk's office anonymously, 3 weeks ago. I wasn't sure what to do with it. Until now." She handed me a plain envelope. Inside, a photocopy of the villa deed, blank where Celine's signature should have been. I looked up. No one else seemed to notice her. She walked away without another word. I sat, staring at that missing signature. Someone wanted me to have this. The envelope sat on my kitchen table like it didn't belong there. Too clean, too intentional. The handwriting wasn't Celine's, or mine, or anyone I'd known from the courthouse. No return address, just my name, printed, neat. I turned it over twice before opening it. The flap came up stiff, as if the glue had only just dried. Inside was a photocopy of the villa deed, and a small folded note. 6 words in scrawled pen. "Ask about the notary. Follow the date." I stared at that phrase like it was some kind of riddle, but my gut already understood. The notary. The date. That detail had been scratching at the back of my brain since the hearing. I grabbed the copy of the trust Fayard filed, scanned the notary block again, and there it was. The signature bore the stamp of Darla Kay. Means her license expired 2 months before Celine supposedly signed. It wasn't just a slip. Whoever sent this knew. I didn't sleep that night. At sunrise, I packed a thermos of coffee, took the original paperwork from my file marked Celine Truth, and drove 2 counties east to the address listed under the old notary's name. It was no longer a law office. Now it was a locksmith shop tucked between a bait store and an abandoned laundromat. The man behind the counter was in his 60s, white hair tied back, arms covered in faded navy tattoos. Said his name was Roy. I told him I was looking into a legal matter tied to the former tenant, Darla Kay. Means, "She was the notary here, right?" I asked. Roy leaned back. "Was. She passed, couple years back, quiet lady. Died of a stroke, I think." I asked if he had any old records. To my surprise, he pulled a dusty file box from under the counter. Didn't throw 'em out. Figured someday someone might come asking. Inside was a stack of business cards, a few folders, and a copy of Darla's obituary. Dated 2 weeks before Celine supposedly signed that trust. I stared at the date like my mind couldn't accept it, but it was there, in black and white. The notary was dead before the signature ever happened. My hands trembled, but not from nerves, from clarity. I drove straight to the county clerk's office and paid for a certified copy of Darla's death certificate. Once I had that, I sat in my truck with the engine off and stared at the steering wheel. Celine didn't sign that document. Not legally, maybe not at all. Back home, evening was folding in. The porch light clicked on as I locked the truck. I poured myself a bourbon but didn't touch it. I stood by the window, looking out at the empty gravel road. That's when the phone rang. No caller ID, just unknown. "Mr. Dorn?" The voice was female. Young, maybe late 20s, cautious. "Yes, who's this?" "I can't tell you my name yet, but I used to work for your son." She said it like a confession. My heart thumped. "I sent the envelope. There's more. I can't be seen." I kept my voice steady. "You worked with Fayard?" "I did. He pressured clients, older ones, rushed signatures. I saw him do it to your wife." My throat dried. "She told me once. I signed too much, too fast. I didn't know what she meant until later. I wanted to speak up, but I was afraid. I asked to meet." She hesitated. "I need time. I'll call again. Please. Just don't trust what's on paper. Look deeper." The line clicked off. That night, I couldn't sit still. I walked the edge of the property, the same path Celine used to take every spring, inspecting flower beds and hummingbird feeders. Her presence still clung to the air, the way honeysuckle holds on after sundown. Had I failed her? Had I stood too far back, given Fayard too much room to manipulate her? I clenched the death certificate in my hand. I wasn't angry for myself anymore. I was angry for Celine, and for the silence forced on her. I remembered something she once quoted to me while trimming rose bushes. Justice cannot be for one side alone, but must be for both. She deserved better, and I would make sure she got it, in the eyes of the law and of the world. I placed the death certificate with the envelope in my secure file. Tomorrow, I'd call Judge Wexler. I'd ask for a full estate review. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was fraud, betrayal, theft. I was halfway through my second cup of stale coffee when I saw headlights flicker across the window. A car, parked at the end of my drive, engine running, no one stepping out. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The moment my beam hit the windshield, the car peeled off. No plates, no brake lights. The next morning, I found the mailbox door hanging open. Inside, a single piece of paper. Typed, "Stop digging. She's gone." Let it stay that way. I read it once, folded it in half, walked to the kitchen, lit the stove, and held the corner over the flame until it curled black and dropped into the sink. I buried my wife with peace. I won't bury the truth with fear. I sat at the edge of Celine's bed, the same spot she used to fold laundry or read mystery paperbacks late into the night. The room hadn't changed. Her lavender sachet still faintly scented the air. I reached into the bottom drawer of her nightstand and pulled out the old flip phone I couldn't bring myself to throw away. The charger still sat coiled behind the lamp. It took a few minutes, but when the screen finally flickered to life, there it was. One saved voicemail, dated months before she passed. My thumb hovered over play. "Hey, it's me." Celine's voice cracked softly through the tiny speaker. "I don't know how to bring this up yet, about what Fayard's been asking me to do. It's hard to explain." Her breath hitched. I don't feel right about signing these things. But we'll talk when there's time. Just not now, okay?" Then, silence. I sat there, letting the static buzz in my ears, playing the message again and again. 3 times through before I finally put the phone down. It wasn't much, but it was her voice. Uncertain. Cornered. Reaching for help she never got to finish asking for. That pain I'd been carrying, raw and shapeless, suddenly found a spine. I stood up and walked straight to the hallway closet. It was time to move. By early afternoon, I was parked outside a small home in Bloomington. Levi Granger's name was still etched into the mailbox in faded brass letters. I knocked, holding the flip phone and a manila folder with the notary's death certificate tucked inside. When the door creaked open, a balding man in a navy cardigan peered out. "I'm Harlan Dorn. I believe you were my wife's estate attorney." He didn't answer at first, just looked down at the folder in my hand. "She always trusted you," I added, "and I think she still does." He let me in. Over tea that neither of us touched, I laid everything on the table, the voicemail, the forged notary signature, the missing hospital records. Granger's shoulders tightened as he reviewed the pages. "She came to me 6 months before she passed," he finally said. "Said someone close to her was pushing her to change the will, but she wasn't ready. Said it felt wrong. Did she ever change it?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I told her to take her time. The last draft she signed was 2 years ago. Left everything to you. She refused to amend it." He reached into a file cabinet and handed me a faded folder. "Here's the copy. It was never revoked." I stared at the page. My name, in her handwriting. Her initials on every clause. Not Fayard. Me. I thanked him and left, heart pounding in my chest like it hadn't in years. The next morning, I went back to the county hospital. I found a nurse Celine had been close to, Maria, her favorite, she always said. Maria pulled me into a side room, eyes darting toward the hallway. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, sliding a folder across the table. "But she listed you, not him, as her legal contact. That was updated 2 days before she passed." I opened the file, and there it was, my name, not Fayard's. He told the court he was the only one contacted, I muttered. Maria nodded slowly. He kept hovering, always in the room. I remember she asked to speak to you, but every time, he interrupted. I exhaled through gritted teeth. Would you be willing to testify? She hesitated. Maybe, but subpoena the security footage. It'll say more than I ever could. By noon, I was back home, spreading documents across the dining table like war maps, voicemail transcripts, notarization fraud, Celine's hospital records, the untouched will draft. I began drafting a formal statement to the probate court, requesting an emergency stay on the villa transaction and a full reevaluation of the estate's handling. I faxed in a request for a new hearing, citing elder coercion, and I called Judge Vexler's clerk. I've got new evidence, I told her. It's time the court saw the truth. After hanging up, I sat quietly in Celine's chair by the window. The anonymous woman hadn't called back, but her tip had cracked this thing wide open. Somewhere inside a box of Celine's old letters, I found a note she once wrote to herself. The truth may move slow, but it always arrives. I wasn't done. That night, I went through Celine's old camcorder. It still smelled faintly like lemon oil, from how she used to wipe it down after family dinners. I scrolled through clips. Thanksgiving, Christmas, our trip to the Smokies. Then, a file named Last Message, dated 4 days before she died. I clicked. Nothing. The screen stayed black. The file wouldn't play. I tried twice more. Heart thudding. Then I noticed the SD card. It looked tampered with. The plastic casing had a faint crack. My jaw clenched. I drove it to a tech repair shop in town. The kid behind the counter promised he'd try data recovery within 48 hours. If she left something behind, I needed to hear it. And I had a feeling. It wasn't just meant for me. 2 days passed, and I barely slept. My dining table looked like a war map. Papers spread out, sticky notes marking sections, every document numbered and cross-referenced. I slipped Celine's voicemail into a labeled envelope, clipped the notarized death certificate behind it. The hospital contact record was highlighted in yellow. The technician's report on the recovered camcorder footage lay front and center, before I zipped up the leather file case. I pulled a small quote Celine had written on a birthday card years ago. She'd underlined it in blue ink. Courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway. John Wayne. I folded it into the front pocket. I put on the blazer I hadn't worn since my VFW chapter honored Celine posthumously last year. It still smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp but bearable. I walked in alone. No entourage, just my name, my documents, and the promise I made to my wife. Fayard showed up in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my entire Social Security check for the month. His lawyer trailed behind him, followed by Natalie, clutching a purse like it contained the last bit of her dignity. They didn't even glance my way. That was fine. I didn't need acknowledgement. I needed justice. Inside the courtroom, Judge Vexler nodded politely but sternly as I stepped up. This session is reopened per emergency motion submitted by Harlan Crowley. New evidence will be reviewed. My knees stiffened slightly, but I stayed upright. This was it. My last shot. I wouldn't flinch. The technician from the repair shop was called as a surprise witness. She held up a thumb drive and looked right at the judge. Recovered footage from a corrupted camcorder. File labeled Last Message. Date matches the week of Mrs. Celine Crowley's passing. The screen flickered to life. Celine appeared, frail but unmistakably lucid. Her eyes met the camera like she knew someone she loved would be watching. If you're seeing this, I didn't get a chance to speak my piece. The courtroom was still as stone. I felt pressured. Fayard used guilt. He made it sound like I was abandoning him if I didn't change things. I never revoked Harlan's role. I just didn't know how to say no. A murmur rose behind me. I saw Fayard shift, his lawyer reaching for a legal pad. Celine's voice quivered toward the end, but her words rang clean. I hope Harlan knows I never stopped trusting him. I just got scared. The video cut out. Judge Vexler leaned forward. Objection? Fayard's lawyer stood, but the judge held up a hand. Overruled. Continue. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. I just bowed my head. Not in shame, but because she was right there, and I wanted her to know I heard her. After a short recess, we reconvened. The judge took his seat and cleared his throat. Given the weight of evidence presented, and testimony indicating coercion and lack of mental capacity at the time of the contested amendments, he looked right at Fayard. I hereby declare the revised trust void. The estate shall revert to the last binding legal version, naming Mr. Harlan Crowley as sole executor. Gasps. One from Natalie, one from Fayard. His lawyer sat back hard in his chair. The judge continued. All posthumous asset transfers made without proper authorization are frozen pending investigation. Fraudulent notary documentation will be reviewed by the district attorney. Fayard stood abruptly. This is insane, he snapped. He's playing victim. Judge Vexler pounded the gavel. One more word, Mr. Crowley, and I'll hold you in contempt. Fayard grabbed his briefcase and stormed out. Natalie followed, silent as stone, heels clicking like gunfire across the tile. The room slowly emptied. I didn't move. I needed a minute. I needed to sit with what just happened. I closed my eyes and mouthed her name, Celine. That night, I made myself a pot of tea and walked into the garden Celine once loved. The garden was tired, neglected, but life hung on in the corners. The snapdragons she adored were still rooted deep, tiny bursts of color stubbornly blooming against fall's chill. I sat on the bench she used to favor. Steam curled from my mug as I stared into the twilight. You were right, Celine, I whispered. It just took me a while to believe it. Forgiveness was not forgetfulness. I couldn't forget what Fayard tried to do, but I didn't need to live in that anger anymore. I sat there until the stars came out, until my breath became fog. The next morning, I walked the edge of the yard, watering the roses that had held on through the frost. That's when I noticed it, something poking from the old wooden birdhouse. I reached up, fingers brushing the edge, a sealed envelope, faded, handwritten, addressed to me in her looping script. I held it against my chest, eyes closed. Some truths don't belong in a courtroom. They belong in the hands of the person who needs them most. The morning sun poured through Celine's study like it had no idea the weight it lit up. I sat at her old writing desk, hands trembling, eyes locked on the envelope I'd pulled from the birdhouse. Her handwriting, sharp, deliberate, marked it simply. Harlan, nothing more. I slid my finger beneath the flap and unfolded the pages. It wasn't sentimental. It was surgical. She laid it out like she knew I'd be sitting there one day, needing answers she hadn't dared give aloud. She'd overheard Fayard on the phone, talking to someone about adjusting documents and covering inconsistencies. She wrote how afraid she was, not just for herself but for me. If you ever challenge him, she warned, he won't go down quiet, and he won't go down alone. At the bottom, just above her signature, she'd written, if you read this, don't fight him alone. Fayard doesn't lose without a cost. Then the postscript. There's one more truth buried under the flower bed. You'll know which one. I didn't waste time. By dusk, I was out back with a flashlight in one hand and a shovel in the other, standing over her favorite rose bush. It was the one she called her quiet corner, where she used to sit with tea and hum tunes from the 1960s. The soil gave way easier than I expected. 6 inches down, I hit something metal, a rusted tin box. Inside, a notarized will, one I'd never seen. It was dated the day after the so-called hospital revision. Celine's affidavit was stapled to it, typed, signed, time-stamped. She claimed coercion, said she was medicated, confused, and fearful. At the bottom was her signature in full. Next to it, a certified audio recorder. I pressed play. Fayard's voice blared through the static. I don't care what he deserves. The house, the land, all of it's mine. He had his time, now it's my turn. I dropped to my knees in the dirt. My hands were filthy, but my path forward had never been clearer. The next morning, I walked into the sheriff's department with that tin box clutched like a grenade. The officer behind the desk took one look at the documents, listened to the audio, and called in his supervisor. Within an hour, they opened a case. Suspected will fraud. Elder coercion. and obstruction of estate execution. By noon, I was in the office of Miss Rosenthal, a lawyer whose name carried weight across the county. She read every page slowly, glasses perched on the edge of her nose. "This," she finally said, tapping the affidavit, "is dynamite. I'll file an emergency injunction today. We'll start freezing assets Fayard took after Celine passed." She stood and shook my hand. "But know this, Mr. Crowley, men like your son, they don't go down without dragging someone with them." She wasn't wrong. That night, I heard something splatter against my front door. When I opened it, eggs dripped from the wood. A brick lay in the grass beside it, wrapped in duct tape and a typed note. "Old men should stay buried." I didn't call the police. I didn't flinch. I boarded the window with leftover plywood from the barn, cleaned up the glass, then sat down to finish my casserole like nothing had happened. But the next morning, I noticed tire tracks in the backyard, too close to the shed. I didn't need to guess. My neighbor, Mr. Elkins, waved me over as I checked the perimeter. "Saw your boy's car last night," he said, circling slow, like he was scoping something. I nodded, jaw tight. "Thanks, Lou. I've got it handled. I'd been shot at in Vietnam, spent nights in foxholes with rats bigger than cats. Fayard wanted a war. I'd survived worse than him. By the weekend, I called in the only people I trusted, my niece Jenna and my old army buddy, Clyde." I laid everything out, the will, the affidavit, the threats. Jenna sat quiet at first, then nodded. "I knew something was off with him. I'll testify. Uncle Harlan, whatever you need." Clyde just cracked his knuckles. "You want me here? I'll stay. No one's messing with you on my watch." That same day, news broke. Fayard's wife had filed for legal separation, claimed she wanted nothing to do with the investigation. Meanwhile, Judge Vexler froze every account tied to Fayard's firm. The dominoes were falling. That night, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You just destroyed your bloodline. Hope it was worth it." I didn't answer. I screenshotted it, labeled it Exhibit D, and closed the phone. I was boarding up the last broken window the next morning when I heard it. A knock at the door. I opened it slow. A young man, maybe late 20s, stood on the porch. He looked nervous but steady. "Are you Mr. Crowley?" "I am." "I think I'm your grandson," he said, "and I have something to show you." The knock still echoed in my ears as I stood in the doorway, staring at the young man who claimed to be my grandson. He introduced himself as Damon Briggs, steadying his voice as if he'd rehearsed it. "I'm Celine's grandson," he said, his eyes fixed on me. The name alone sent a tremor through my chest. I asked him to explain, and he did, slow, deliberate. He'd discovered it after Celine's passing, a DNA match tied to a closed adoption. He pulled a photograph from his pocket, a faded black and white image of Celine as a teenager, holding a baby boy I'd never seen. Damon told me that boy was his father, who died in an accident when Damon was only 10. He'd been searching for family ever since. My first instinct was suspicion, but there was honesty in his tone I couldn't ignore. Then he set a worn journal on the table. "It was hers," he said quietly. I opened it, and there were Celine's words, her voice flowing across yellowed pages, speaking of the son I never got to raise. I'd known Celine for decades and never once heard her utter those words. I was floored, but not ready to hand out trust so easily. I showed Damon to the guest room and told him to rest. Sleep came slow that night, but I forced myself to read deeper into the journal. Tucked in the back cover were several pages folded small. My hands shook as I opened them. Celine had written about her strict father forcing her to give up her first child. She carried the guilt all her life, and in the final paragraph she admitted, "Fayard must never know. He'd turn this against me." I sat back in my chair, staring at those words. The emotional distance I'd sometimes sensed in Celine, it wasn't toward me, it was toward herself, toward this hidden wound. By dawn, I decided Damon deserved more than questions. I took him to the diner where Celine and I had shared countless breakfasts. The same red vinyl booth, the same smell of bacon grease. We sat across from each other, and I asked him what he knew. Damon spoke of her paintings, the way she hummed when she worked in the kitchen, even her honey tea recipe she swore cured any winter cough. I felt something stir in me, recognition mixed with ache. Still, I couldn't rely on stories alone. When Damon stepped out to take a call, I collected the napkin he'd used and slid it into a plastic bag. Later, I'd swab my own cheek and send both samples to a private lab. Damon hadn't pushed for trust. He even said, "Test me if you need to. I want you to know the truth." That earned a measure of respect I didn't hand out often. After breakfast, I noticed an SUV idling across the street, same model I'd seen lurking near my place before. Clyde later confirmed it had been tailing Damon's rental. My gut told me Fayard already knew something, and that thought twisted hard in my stomach, to throw off the shadow. Clyde and I took Damon through back roads to the public library. There, Damon revealed another piece, an old letter Celine had left with his adoptive parents. In her handwriting, "If this ever reaches you, find Harlan. He'll know what to do." Reading those words broke something open in me. For the first time in years, I felt tears come, not out of weakness, but release. That afternoon, the three of us drove to the county courthouse. Damon's credentials allowed access to sealed adoption records. The file confirmed everything: Celine's affidavit, hospital records, the name of the child's father. No question remained. Damon was her blood, he was family. I turned to him in that dim archive room and said, "You've got a place here. It may not look like much, but it's yours too." Damon's eyes filled with a relief I recognized, the look of a man who'd finally found home, but peace never lasts long in my world. That night, when we returned, a charred envelope was nailed to my front door. Inside was a scorched photo of Celine, ripped clean down the middle, and a cheap lighter etched with the words, "Stay out of graves." Clyde called the sheriff while I pulled Damon aside. My voice was steady. "That warning wasn't just for me, son. It was for you, too." The morning after the burned warning felt heavy before I even stepped outside. I pulled back the curtain and saw Clyde's old pickup parked by the barn. At first it looked normal, but when I walked closer, my stomach clenched. Both side windows were shattered, the glass glittering across the gravel like someone had taken a bat to it. The tires sagged flat, slit straight through with a knife. Whoever did it wasn't sending a warning anymore. They wanted to draw blood. I opened the mailbox, hoping for a bill or a catalog, anything ordinary. Instead, a stiff envelope slid into my hand. Inside was a printed court summons. Fayard had filed suit, claiming Damon was a fraud and demanding full control of Celine's estate. The paper stank of his arrogance. At the sheriff's office, I dropped the summons on the desk. The deputy looked at it, sighed, and said, "It's family. It gets messy. You know how it is." That was all he gave me. No protection, no reassurance. Just another man shrugging off another family tearing itself apart. Clyde was waiting on the porch when I got home. His voice carried more fear than he'd admit. "You ought to step back, Harlan. It's too dangerous now." I stared past him, eyes locked on Celine's portrait in the front room window. "Too late," I said. He drew blood. That night, I sat in Celine's study alone. The smell of old paper and oil paint still clung to the air. Her portrait watched me from the mantel, her eyes calm as if she knew this moment would come. I slid open the hidden drawer in her desk and pulled out the small brass key I'd avoided for years. A safety deposit box, my last card to play. 2 mornings later, Damon and I drove into the city. The First Trust Bank loomed over us, all stone and glass. Inside, the clerk checked the key, the paperwork, then led us down a sterile hallway into the vault. My hand shook as the metal door swung open. Inside the box was a stack of papers wrapped in Celine's handwriting. The first was a handwritten will, updated just weeks before she passed. In it, she named Damon as the majority heir to her separate estate, her artwork, her journals, even the cabin she called her sanctuary. Tucked beside it was a sealed envelope marked, "To Judge Redford, open only in emergency." My breath caught as I turned the pages. She had signed an affidavit about Fayard's abuse, his manipulation, the way he had tried to corner her with fear. Celine had anticipated all of this and left behind the map to bring him down. Damon's jaw tightened as he read, but his eyes didn't flinch. She knew, he whispered. Then louder, let's go to court. I called in an old favor from my late brother's friend, a retired judge named Miller. He read the documents carefully, then leaned back. With Damon's DNA certified in this affidavit, you've got a firestorm. He prepared an emergency injunction blocking Fayard's claims. We also filed charges for harassment, pointing to the vandalism and the threats. Later that afternoon, I walked into Judge Redford's chambers and handed him Celine's sealed letter. His expression shifted as he read, stern at first, then softened with a weight I recognized. He called Fayard and his attorney into a private session. No one said a word as the walls seemed to close in on my son. When Clyde handed me the investigator's report showing Fayard had Damon tailed, I knew the tide had turned. Redford set a hearing date, but I understood this fight wasn't only about law, it was about the court of public opinion. That night, Damon and I sat at the kitchen table. I slid a flash drive across the wood. On it was Celine's last recording, one she had left behind, her voice fragile yet unbroken. In the video, she spoke of the son I couldn't hold and the man who gave me peace. She told the truth in a way paper never could. The next morning, my friend's granddaughter uploaded it online. Within hours, it spread. Folks shared it, whispered about it at the grocery store, replayed her words on their phones. The town newspaper picked up the story, laying out Fayard's threats, his misuse of power, his cruelty. At the farmer's market, people stopped me mid-aisle. "That's the real man," one woman said. "That's Celine's legacy." For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was walking into battle alone. Damon walked beside me, his silence respectful, his presence steady. When the hearing came, Fayard's lawyer leaned across the table with a look that told me everything. "Settlement," he muttered. Damon would take half of Celine's art estate and all rights to her journals and cabin. I would keep the house and land, with Damon named next in line. Fayard walked out without a word, shoulders slumped, his empire reduced to ash. I didn't smile. I turned to Damon instead. He wanted an empire. I just wanted peace. Looks like we got both, where they belong. That evening, we drove out to the lake cabin. The air was quiet. The water still. Inside, the place was untouched. Easels leaned against the wall, brushes waiting in jars, and a sealed letter on the desk addressed simply, "My boys." My chest ached as I ran a hand across it, but I felt lighter than I had in years. As the sun dropped low, Damon pulled up a floorboard and found a small locked metal box. He held it up, dust drifting off its surface. "She never mentioned this," he said. I stared at it, then out at the darkening lake. "You want to open it now?" he asked. I shook my head. My voice came out low, steady. "No. Let it wait. Some truths earn their time.